Christine Zach. As Serena shared, I am the chair of the board. And yes, thank you again for joining us and for joining us for any of the events in the coming year for our 40th anniversary. It's really special. So also as part of this, Sharol has been generous enough to partner with us on creating a bird-friendly chocolate tasting kit. A percentage will go back to SFBBO as part of our fundraiser. So if you didn't happen to order one before this program, we encourage you to order one after this program. And to in general, think about, the upcoming chocolate needs in your household. Halloween's around the corner, so are the holidays. So this is a really responsible way to purchase your, tasty treats for your loved ones. And so lastly, I will introduce Sharol Nelson-Embry. Sharol is a naturalist at East Bay Parks. She is also a certified master of tasting of chocolate, which sounds amazing. I'm sure that was a fun process. She has done other talks, for instance, for Golden Gate Audubon on a similar subject. She's also published on this topic. I'm sure Sharol is going to share about her process that she developed for designing bird-friendly chocolate today, so I won't give too much about that away. But I will say, setting up this talk with her, it was very interesting to learn about, and I'm really excited to hear this talk today. So thank you everyone for joining. Sharol, see you.
Thank you. That was a great introduction. I'm really excited to be here and be a part of this. And I'm just gonna do some technological wizardry here for a minute and get my slideshow up. So I'm so glad you're here. And I know that we have some bird lovers as well as chocolate lovers joining us today. And I know that some of you have purchased the kit, so feel free to break into that as we go along. And I'll be sharing with you about what bird-friendly chocolate is and how you can love both birds and chocolate. So I know a few of you put in the poll and in the comments what kind you prefer. There are all different kinds of chocolate, all different kinds of brands. And when we break it down into the kinds of chocolate, I'm thinking about milk chocolate and dark chocolate, which is generally over 50% cacao. And then white chocolate, which some people contend is not chocolate at all, but it actually is, because it's the pressed cocoa butter from the cacao bean and sugar and milk usually. And then some of us just love any and all. And there are a few people that maybe prefer the birds over the chocolate that we're going to be talking about. But I did want to bring up this fact that Hershey bars, if you are familiar with those and have tried them, they only have 11% cacao, which is the basic minimum that they have to meet in order to be called chocolate. So the percentage of cacao is a pretty important consideration. So let me just give you a quick tutorial on how they make your chocolate bars. And to do this, I'm going to have a quick little video here, and then we'll take a short dive into some chocolate history. And then we'll be getting into more of the birds that are associated with some of the chocolate growing areas. So we will check this out. So there you have it, 10 easy steps to make your chocolate bar, all the way from growing in the tropical forest to landing in your hand and unwrapping a delicious chocolate bar. Well, a little bit of history, chocolate goes way back in time. So the cacao trees, they think were growing in the Guatemala area and eventually were transported up into Mexico, where really it became the centerpiece for the Toltecs, the Mayans. The precursors of both of those groups were the Olmecs, and then finally the Aztecs. And so cacao was an important ceremonial. They drank it as a beverage, and it was worth a lot to them. So they used it as currency. And you know, it was a very important thing. They credited cacao with being brought to them by the gods. So the Mayans had mythology around where cacao came from, and the Aztecs also credited it to this deity. So they called this one Quetzalcoatl. And you can see that he was a feathered serpent, which when I was thinking about this program, I thought, wow, isn't that interesting that birds we can trace back to feathered dinosaurs, which are precursors of the serpents. And here we have a deity that combines both the reptiles and the birds and is credited with bringing cacao to humans. And it was actually to Quetzalcoatl's demise that he chose to bring cacao down from the heavens, where it was a food of the gods, which to this day is what the scientific name of it means, is food of the gods, Theobroma cacao. And so the gods were really mad at Quetzalcoatl for doing that. And so he actually was kind of an outcast of the gods and ended up dying and then returning later on. So he's got sort of this reincarnation thing going on. But you can see in this, from the codex picture, that he also was known for bringing maize, as well as learning and knowledge. So this god did a lot for the people, they thought. And here you can see another codex drawing that shows cacao next to this nobleman who's sitting and negotiating with a lower class person who's kneeling before him, and his servant is off to the other side. And you can see that big vat that has a frothy top, and that was cacao. And it was saved for ceremonial reasons, as well as being enjoyed by the nobility. You can see here that in this codex picture, there is a woman who's pouring cacao between two vessels from a great height, because at this time, they did the harvesting, they did the fermentation, they did the drying, but what they ended up with when they ground up the cacao is a very oily kind of drink. And so to make it more palatable, they would pour it between vessels to create this great foam on top. They'd also flavor it with things like vanilla and chiles, and also with cornmeal. And this was traditionally drunk by the Mayans. They would drink it hot. The Aztecs drank it cold. And it was reported that in Montezuma's time that he would drink like 50 cups a day of this stuff. So it's kind of an amazing thing. Well, here you can see that even though that cacao had been a part of the culture for such a long time, that there was contact with the Europeans. Here's Cortez meeting Montezuma, and we know the ending of that story, not good for the Aztecs, but it was a great boon for Europeans, because even though Cortez was not the first European to be reported to encounter cacao, he was the one that brought it back to Europe. And he had it served to him in golden goblets by the Aztecs. And so not only did he find out that they had access to a lot of gold, which he was very interested in, he also found out about cacao and brought it back, where it became a big favorite of the Spanish court. And the Spanish, in fact, managed to keep it a secret and start building plantations for it along their trade routes. But it didn't get out into the rest of Europe for about 100 years. So that's quite a feat, if you can imagine that, you know. And one of the ways that it managed to get out into the rest of European society was by the marriage of the nobility. So some of the Spanish princesses and the higher ranking people married out, and they brought the cacao with them. And here you can see a very French chocolate party. And so it eventually made its way to become not just for nobility, but by the time it made it to England and then finally to America, it was more of a common person's drink. And there were chocolate houses that were popular. So if we fast forward now to today, you can see that chocolate cacao is grown around the world. And in that little video, you saw where it's 20 degrees north and south of the equator that has the perfect growing conditions currently for cacao. And one of the primary growing areas that the majority of the world's chocolate comes from is from West Africa, especially from the Ivory Coast. So you can see that little dark spot there on the west coast of Africa. But each country that grows cacao, and even sometimes broken further down into different parts of the country, and even from plantation to plantation or growing area to growing area, the chocolate develops a specific flavor profile that makes it unique to that area. And so one of the things I've really been enjoying is looking into chocolate that's made in a specific origin or from a specific area of the world. And so they call that single origin chocolate. So for instance, if you get a chocolate bar that's from, let's say Ghana, and you taste that, it has a very fudgy flavor profile. And you can compare that to a chocolate that's grown in the Dominican Republic, and that's going to have a very fruity profile. And in fact, if you get chocolate from Madagascar, it's going to have a very citrusy flavor profile and maybe a little bit of spice notes to it. And so one of the things that chocolate makers are doing now is they are really perfecting the art of getting chocolate from one origin and then figuring out the best way to roast it. Sometimes it has to do with the fermentation too. And they are developing these really amazing chocolates that are really fun to explore. So bird-friendly chocolate. Some of you may have only heard about this now for the first time. It's kind of a new thing. The bird-friendly coffee has been certified by the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center for about 10 years now. And they are still in the process of developing the standards to be able to identify different kinds of bird-friendly chocolate. But a couple of the mainstays for the coffee is that it's shade grown, so they leave some of the overstory of the rainforest. And that provides habitat for the birds as well as shade for the coffee and also chocolate. And then also they use agroforestry methods. So they are not using a lot of pesticides or fertilizers, and they're relying more on the natural ecosystem, which actually makes a healthier forest for both the animals and people that live there, as well as the products that come out of it. The Rainforest Alliance also has a certification program for many different kinds of products that come from rainforests. In looking into their chocolate, they were really focusing more on the West African chocolate, because that seems to be where most of the chocolate that's getting used by big producers is coming from. And in doing a little investigation into that, it seemed like they were having problems with their certification and in being able to verify that, in fact, what they were certifying was happening. One of the big problems with West African chocolate, especially, is that child labor can be involved in it. And so none of the big chocolate manufacturers at this point can certify that their chocolate does not include a chain that includes child labor. And so, you know, they're still working on it. I'm glad that there are some standards that they are looking at applying with both of these organizations. And, you know, it's just a matter now of how well they can enforce those standards and pull people's certifications if they're not meeting those standards. So what I found is that a lot of the smaller chocolate makers are looking for small growers, and they are meeting some of these standards that are being considered. So they are, you know, either being harvested in the wild, which really, when you look at the importance of rainforests around the world to climate change, as well as to preserving vast tracts of land, that's one of the best things, is if people can make a living off of harvesting a sustainable crop like that. So we'll be talking about some of the chocolate makers that use that method. And then also the agroforestry, the sustainable agriculture, and then the shade grown. So let's take a little look at some of the amazing things that are happening. So in the Dominican Republic, there is this reserve that's dedicated to an endangered species. So this is the Bicknell's thrush. And, you know, when I look at this bird, it just makes me think so much of our local thrushes and, you know, the hermit thrush. And, but this bird is very special. It has a lot of problems because it has such a unique migratory pattern. So let's take a look at its range map here. So you can see that it breeds up in the far north on the East Coast. So here's the East Coast of the United States. You can see that it's up there in Canada, as well as the northern states up at the border of the United States. It goes all the way down into the northern part of New York, and that's its breeding habitat. I was listening to a fascinating podcast about the Canadian area that the Bicknell's thrush breeds in, and the Canadian government's been working with the Indigenous people to set aside some of the area that can not only support Bicknell's thrush breeding area, but also be an important place for the Indigenous people to carry on their lives and livelihoods. So if you can find that podcast, I highly recommend it. It's by the Bird Note people. And then you can see, once they're done breeding, the Bicknell's thrush does this incredible migration all the way down and over to the Dominican Republic, which is this island. You can see the blue dot down there. That's an island that shares the Dominican Republic and Haiti. So we all know what struggles that particular island nation has encountered with hurricanes and all kinds of terrible things, earthquakes. But the Bicknell's thrush has this reserve that it can go to. The males and females of the species winter at differing elevations. And so one of the things that happens on this reserve is that cacao can be grown and help to provide a source of income to both support the reserve as well as the indigenous people that live in that area. And so it's really a model that other areas can follow so that, you know, the people can value the habitat that this important endangered species needs. So a couple of chocolate bars as examples of cacao that's harvested from this reserve. So our local Dandelion Chocolate here in San Francisco makes an excellent bar. And then I also found this other chocolate maker that's in Michigan, and they make a bar from the Zorzal Reserve. And both of these bars are really excellent. If you have not tried it, you really should. And I like knowing that when you buy this bar that you're helping to contribute to an important endangered species too. So moving on, we're moving over to the Indonesian area, and the island of Sulawesi has this reserve that's on it that's run by BirdLife International. And I wanted to highlight in these areas that we're going to visit next, just one of the kind of iconic birds. They're not especially endangered, but some of them are very vulnerable at this point. So if you know anything about hornbills, they're amazing birds that live in the tropical forests. They have these really big beaks, and they use those to eat fruit that's found in the rainforests. They need quite a bit of habitat in order to sustain their lives. They don't migrate, you know, great distances, so they're kind of a little more local birds. But because of the loss of habitat, a lot of them are in trouble. And the Sulawesi hornbill is vulnerable to becoming threatened. There are other hornbills, like in Thailand, where they are really in trouble. And one of the things that's happening with those that I look at as a model for how hornbills can be protected is that in Thailand, there's a woman scientist who's enlisting former bird poachers to become nest watchers. And they're taking donations for that nest watch program that then this woman can pay the former poachers for kind of helping to safeguard the nests. One of the interesting things about hornbills is how they nest. And so what they do is they find holes in mature trees, and the female will be walled up inside of this hole with her nest of eggs. The male then is responsible for hunting and bringing fruits and insects and small reptiles to the female to feed her for about 4 months while she incubates the eggs and takes care of the babies until finally she can be unwalled and the babies can fledge. So you know, it's a very vulnerable time for them when the female is in the nest. And for a lot of nest poachers, that's what they look for, is these walled up nests. And then they would go in and take babies to sell illegally in the pet trade. And in other areas, that's really taken a large toll on the hornbill population. So in the Sulawesi Reserve, they harvest cacao that's grown there. And here is the chocolate bar that's made from the Sulawesi cacao. So it's a company that is in Singapore, and they have really wild flavors of cacao. But this is the one particular bar called the Burung bar, which means bird in the language. And so it commemorates the, you know, the great reserve that's being both an area to protect birds as well as an area where cacao can be harvested. And it's a very delicious bar too. If you can read on there, I don't know, it's very small, but it has flavor notes of olives and figs and cardamom. It's really an amazing bar, and I highly recommend you try it. So there's another way that companies that are for-profit can also support the local people where the chocolate is grown. So our local company, Cho, I just read they're a newly designated B Corporation. And so what that means is that even though they're for-profit, they're using their profits to reinvest in the communities where the cacao is grown. They're verified that they're a social and environmentally conscious company. And they also have some legal accountability to balance their profit and their purpose. And so a lot of times, companies like this will invest in the village where the people live. So they provide for schooling and medical expenses. They may even provide transportation for the people. And sometimes they provide loans. Some of the Cho source that I've read about, they also will provide electricity. It's an amazing thing, because when you look at a lot of the lives of the people that are farming the cacao, they're really living in poverty sort of circumstances. And so I think it's a great way for us to be able to responsibly enjoy some of the chocolate that we eat. And they're also learning to take care of the area where the chocolate grows. So how they can, best grow the chocolate for really great tasting chocolate, but also how they can make a sustainable area that they can live in and benefit from. So we're going to take a little look at some made at origin chocolate. So for me, this is kind of the epitome. So far we've looked at chocolate makers that are at a distance. So they get the chocolate and they transport it to the United States or to some of the other countries that are big chocolate makers. Europe has a lot of big chocolate makers. But here, made at origin, that's where the chocolate maker is in the country where the chocolate is grown. And what oftentimes happens is, as you move up the supply chain, of course, the farmers and the harvesters are getting paid the lowest amount. So while we might be buying a $10 bar of chocolate, they're just making pennies off of that product. And so made at origin, this is one example of chocolate that, I'm sorry, I have to move something down here. Well, so Louisa Abrams is a chocolate maker in Brazil. And her model is going into the indigenous communities along different rivers in the Amazon. And each particular river, she'll have them harvest the chocolate from that river, keep it together. It usually is fermented in the fields near where it's harvested from and dried, and then transported to her chocolate factory. And she keeps those origins together. So her chocolate, you can taste the Acara River, you can taste the Tocantins River, and each one has a really different flavor profile. And the indigenous people that live along those rivers are able then to get paid more than fair trade wages and be able to value the habitat that this chocolate is growing in. So I want to show you a short little video, and hopefully this won't let me down. I don't think we'll see the translation, but that's okay. You can get the gist that she's going up the rivers and bringing it back to her chocolate factory in Sao Paulo.
Sou Luísa Bran e lhe convido a conhecer chocolate que muda o mundo. O cacau é selvagem. Chegar até ele não é tarefa fácil. E a balsa encalhou. A diversidade encontrada na floresta faz o cacau de lá um ingrediente perfeito para o chocolate fino. Respeitamos e valorizamos o trabalho das comunidades ribeirinhas. Pagando preço justo, melhorando suas rendas. É dessa forma que contribuímos para a preservação da floresta amazônica. Embarque nessa deliciosa jornada comigo e vamos juntos mudar o mundo.
So if you think about the Brazilian Amazon, you know, we know that there are a lot of bad things happening there. The forests are being burned and cleared to make way for cattle and for soybeans, that the current president there is supporting all of these incursions into the rainforest. And I just wanted to show a couple of pictures here of the birds that are at risk from these deforestation activities. So the white-throated toucan, it's a vulnerable bird. I mean, wow, what I would give to go and see this bird in the wild. And the toucans are frutivores primarily, but they also will eat insects, small mammals, reptiles. You know, with a beak like that, you can pretty much eat almost anything. They do need large tracts of land. And so the destruction of the rainforest is a big problem. Also, the pet trade is a big problem, which, you know, living in the United States, I don't think we really have a grip on how common it is to have these animals taken from the wild and be made part of a little personal zoo or pets. It's kind of disturbing. And then on the right, the hyacinth macaw. Can you just imagine seeing a bird like this flying through a forest? Just amazing. There's only about 3,000 of these birds left. So they are trying really hard to save them, bring them back. But the more that we can support rainforest conservation, you know, the better. And I don't know what, you know, we're going to have to do. If we people, you know, we're in the age of the Anthropocene, so the age of man, where we've kind of supplanted a lot of natural processes. And I think we're going to have to really take a lot of responsibility, because we can't just keep extracting without fixing. So, you know, buying a chocolate bar might not seem like a lot, but if we can help to establish the importance of these habitats, and that it is economically feasible to do sustainable extraction, it might turn things around or help a little bit. All we can do is our part. So let's move into Peru. And Peru also has some amazing chocolate makers. This one, CocoaCase, they are going around Peru and they are doing genetic testing on chocolate to find and preserve these different strains of chocolate and the flavor profiles of the chocolate. And they're working directly with the indigenous people to do this too. So we'll take a look at this one.
CocoaCase es una empresa que no solo busca desarrollar chocolates, sino busca integrar en toda esta cadena de valor a los agricultores de diferentes partes del Perú.
Y nosotros lo que hemos hecho es trabajar ese cacao desde el árbol, para llevarlo a un grano seco que sea excelente, que venga acá a nuestra planta en óptimas condiciones para hacer un trabajo con eso que es muy simple. Tostarlo, agregar azúcar y nada más, sin aditivos, porque en la simpleza está el arte.
A diferencia de trabajar con algunas certificaciones como Fair Trade, Cacao Suyo prefiere hacer Direct Trade. Eso significa pagar por el cacao directamente al agricultor en el campo. Y de esta manera hacemos que la calidad de vida de ellos mejore.
Ya os que bako suhin no hi bako pachim ha no yo asain ilek yupi chu suhai akicho akiki atso iman suhin no nonika inkuni hi de casa cacao suyo apuhi he nonika inkunika de casi cham shi umikahen capacito atam que dutika na sintin hamamte ya be bako akik suhai no sa shin anasa batsa.
Estamos contentos de tantos reconocimientos internacionales que tiene Cacao Suyo, pero estamos también conscientes que no es solo a nuestro chocolate, sino a nuestro cacao, a esos pequeños productores que hacen posible que encontremos este cacao maravilloso en tantas diferentes partes del Perú.
Shin anamo ave de cas ina bakohin take na haneno asamte de cas duka bakok ino.
Cacao Suyo tiene la idea de darte un viaje de los cacaos peruanos a través de nuestro chocolate.
Para que el mundo pueda disfrutarlo y para que sepa que Cacao Suyo está hecho 100% por peruanos.
Elmer.
Yanoa.
Javier. Ino.
Just find out a little bit from you, what some of your favorite birds were from today. And if you're, looking for ways that you can support them, you might consider getting some of the chocolate that goes along with that. And so thank you for having me today and talking a little bit about birds and chocolate. And love to hear if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I thought that was fantastic, and I know that I am definitely craving chocolate now. So thank you so much for that. I learned so much, and I hope everyone else did too. So just really quickly as a reminder, in case there are some people who do need to leave early, I'm going to just remind people about some of those upcoming events that we have. Please feel free to join us. We hope to see you. And also participate in our silent auction. You can get a lot of really great items there. And of course, please do purchase those bird-friendly tasting kits, bird-friendly chocolate tasting kits from CocoaCase, where a portion of the proceeds will also benefit SFBBO, and you'll get to try a lot of those chocolates that Cheryl mentioned. So get those while you can, because they're only around while supplies last. So please do order that and go ahead and check out her website, CocoaCase.com, to find those. So with that, we're going to move on to questions, unless Cheryl, there's anything else you want to add to that first.
No, I do have multiple kinds of chocolate. So the one for the SFBBO is just one of many options that you have. And I am always looking for new chocolate makers too. So if any of you come across interesting new ones, please send them my way. You can always email me at my website.
Awesome, thanks for that. So I think we're ready to go on to questions. And so Diane asked, how did you get to be a master chocolate taster?
Well, I've been pursuing this path for about 9 years, but I did come across this École Chocolat that's up in Canada, and they offer a certification course for both people that want to make chocolate, so learning how to transform the beans into chocolate. And then they also have courses that teach you more about, you know, tasting chocolate. And so it was about a 6-week course. And it was a lot of fun. I actually learned a whole lot by taking that course. And one of the important things is, you know, we talked about some of the flavor notes, and a lot of the chocolate makers now will put the flavor notes on the outside of their package. But having experienced this myself, you can have a totally different tasting experience just based on the time of day that you taste the chocolate. So sometimes it will be more fruity, sometimes it'll be more spicy. It's kind of amazing. Oh, nice, Diane. Diane's Canadian, so she's gonna look them up. Yeah, if you're interested in chocolate, that's a place to do a very deep dive.
Oh, really interesting. I didn't know that. And Jan, you know, related to what you just mentioned too, Jan asked, can you give some tips on how to taste chocolate to maximize enjoyment?
Yes. In fact, I have a blog on my website that goes into more detail, but basically just getting together as a small group of chocolates that you want to try, some of the single origins, maybe not tasting more than 3 or 4 at a time, and really doing it almost as a meditation. So, you know, you want to take away distractions. You don't want to have just eaten something with a strong flavor. And you want to just like really concentrate and just take a small piece of chocolate, make sure your palate's clear, have some water so that you're not tasting other things. And then just let the chocolate melt in your mouth and let it kind of coat your mouth. And maybe even do that a couple of times with the same kind of chocolate. And it's helpful to sometimes have a flavor wheel just so that you can kind of reference what you're tasting and think, is that a berry? Is that fudge? Is it licorice? What is that flavor? And then pay attention, because as the chocolate kind of melts in your mouth and you swallow it, there's even additional flavors that linger in your mouth. And so, you know, this whole idea of chocolate tasting is really kind of a prolonged meditation on chocolate. And then before you taste the next one, just, you know, take a sip of water, just room temperature water is fine, and let your palate clear, and then go on to the next one. It really is a really neat adventure.
That sounds like a fun group activity for people to compare notes.
And you can also pair it with wine, which is another amazing thing, because the wine, the right wines can amplify the tastes or create whole new flavors together. So as well as not just wine, because I know not everybody's into wine, but you can do it with other kinds of alcohol. You can even do it with tea. So there's some websites you can look up for chocolate pairings. And a surprising but amazing chocolate pairing is pairing it with different kinds of cheese. So that's something I never thought of, but I went to a tasting where they paired chocolates and cheeses, and it was great.
That sounds amazing. And then, you know, Diane also mentioned, since you mentioned wine, have you done chocolate and wine pairings, and hopefully with bird-friendly wine?
Oh, you know, I don't know that many bird-friendly wines, so I'll have to look that up. But I would imagine a lot of the organic wines would be good ones to try. And we're so fortunate to be here in California with so many good different wines. And I have done a lot of wine pairing. Not that I drink a lot of wine, mind you, but it's something that I've been trying out with some of our local wineries. So I've done a couple of different events with some of the wineries where I'll bring some chocolate to pair with their wines. And in the chocolate tasting kits, I do recommend different kinds of wines that can enhance some of the flavors of the chocolate. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And another reason to get one of your kits, to get those recommendations. Another question is from Martha. How can we get bird-friendly chocolate to the average person at the grocery store?
That's a really good question. And there are some that may qualify. I know Ghirardelli was sourcing some single origin chocolates for a while. I'm sorry, not Ghirardelli, Guittard. And now it seems like they've gone back to more of the blended chocolates, so it's hard to say exactly what the origin is. But I think until the Smithsonian Bird Center actually comes up with their standards, I don't know that the really big chocolate makers are going to be able to label anything bird friendly. So I think, you know, I'd encourage you to support the Smithsonian maybe, and to think about whether you want to buy the mass-produced chocolates that are not bird friendly. I know that, you know, the consumer has a lot of power. So think about where you want your money to go and what you want it to support. I know for this anti-slavery aspect that I think, was it Diane that said she liked Tony Chocolonely's chocolate? And it is one of the few rare ones that's available on the local supermarket that is definitely not supporting slavery. So yeah, that's one you can look for. I don't think that Tony has gotten it down to single origin yet, but you can also go to some of our great local chocolate makers like Dandelion and Cho. And so, you know, there are some other smaller chocolate makers that are probably sourcing things more ethically than the mass-produced chocolates.
Yeah, that's good to know. And Diane also wants to connect with you about doing a chocolate and wine tasting at Foothill Winery, so I'll get you both connected afterwards.
Awesome. I'd love that.
Yeah. And then, well, I'm curious to know, since you had posed the question to everybody about what their favorite chocolate is, what kind of chocolate is your favorite?
Oh, I know. Since I always ask that question, that's a hard one for me to answer because, you know, I guess I have some old favorites that I keep going back to. I mean, Dandelion is just an amazing chocolate maker. And I love that they're local in the Bay Area, and they were some of the forefront people moving towards, you know, making single origin chocolates available and accessible for a lot of people. And so I love trying all of theirs. I always look for 70% cacao. So I like the darker chocolates, but there's also some pretty good ones that are, you know, more milk chocolates too. I know I went to a tasting last weekend with a chocolate maker from above Seattle. They're called Fresco. And the chocolate maker there is just this engineer, and he's got these recipes for how long he roasts his chocolate and how long he conches it. So, you know, that's the mixing portion. And each of his recipes is geared towards producing a particular flavor of chocolate, even from the same beans. And so I'm always impressed when people are so passionate and so dedicated to producing an exceptional product like that. You know, it's just really fun to be able to connect with some of these amazing chocolate makers. So yeah, that's my favorites. And if you ever get a chance to go up to Seattle for the chocolate festival, they're holding it on October 30th this year. It's just this humongous gathering of small chocolate makers, and everybody has samples out, and you can go and try all of these different chocolates. Locally, there's the chocolate salon that they put on over in San Francisco, and that's another great one to try. So there's a lot of adventures you can have with chocolate. locally and further away.
Yeah, all of that sounds absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for sharing all of that information. And I think that that's the last question I'm seeing in the chat right now. So if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to email me or contact Sharol through her website. I'll be sure to connect you with Diane. And yeah, is there anything else that you want to share with everyone before we sign off?
No, just thank you so much for coming, and thanks for supporting the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory and the important work that they're doing. So it's been a pleasure to spend the evening with you guys.
Yes, likewise. And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing to, connect birds and chocolate and help nature that way. So I think that's a great way to play your part. Even after this great career as a naturalist, you're continuing the mission. So thank you again so much for all you do.
Oh, thank you. We're making the world better one chocolate bar at a time.
I love that. All right. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Sharol. I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening, and I hope to see you at a future event. Take care.
Bye.